So there's some other implications that I think are important to at least be aware of as educators and parents, grandparents, that comes from evolutionary biology as well. This was the first model that I had as a young teacher, starting in 1972, at a mental hospital. I taught at the high school. That began to make me aware of my yearning to know more about learning, and particularly about the brain, of which I knew nothing as a new teacher. I had to get a 5th year in the university to get a certificate to teach in California, but nothing about the brain. And it was this model of the triune brain, which at the time was becoming quite popular, this idea that came from a very large team, maybe one of the most expensive research projects ever undertaken to this day. They produced hundreds of journal articles and a number of books about this revolutionary idea of mammalian brain. Dr. Paul MacLean was the leader, since passed away, but really a visionary. As these things, as happens, these models fall into disuse. New evidence proves them wrong in some ways. So it fell out of favor for quite a while, but it never fell out of favor with me, and I was interested recently, a book, really an homage to this team of researchers who said, look, we admit that they had the details wrong, but they didn't have the technologies, right? And brain science has gotten more and more specialized. It's going down narrower and smaller channels, which is fine, but who's going to give us the big picture, right? And these brilliant scientists wrote chapters for this new book that came out recently about the triune brain, and they said, he got it right. And we really need to recognize how important this model still remains for the big picture, because not enough big picture science is done. Well, without going through some of that particular research, I wanted to share one component of it, which they refer to in different language as the non-negotiable demands of the mammalian brain. In other words, if the mammal brain is going to do what it's designed to do, evolutionarily, 3 things have to be present in the environment of that mammal species, the individuals in it, in order for the brain to develop properly. And I really believe this is going to stand the test of time. In no particular order, they are nurture. Nurture for mammals is the major organizing principle of the health of the body and the viability of the brain. Mammals, except humans, have this very peculiar behavior around nurture where they lick the young. And it isn't just about cleaning the young, although it does that. It's about stimulating the largest sense organ of the body, which is the skin. Well, we don't do that as humans, but we have our own way of bringing the largest sensory organ of the human body online, which is breastfeeding and touch. When a baby's touched, when a baby's breastfed, it releases an array of brain chemicals. There's dozens of them that bring the baby's brain and body into healthy repose. BDNF is brain-derived neural factor. It's if you think of miracle grow for plants, this is miracle grow for the brain. And it's touching which does that. And it breaks my heart when back, I guess it was in the 80s, there were a few random incidents of teachers molesting children. And then this hysteria started about, oh, don't touch the children, don't touch the children. Whatever you do, don't touch the children. Well, okay, if we're not going to touch the children, we have to realize there's a trade-off there. Because we require touch. Even the smallest amount of touch releases serotonin. Now, when serotonin is released, it goes from the gut to the brain in about 20 seconds. And if the brain has enough serotonin in it, it feels calm, comfortable, secure, and safe, which is the very first thing a mammal has to feel in order to learn. Because if a mammal feels threatened, the brain downshifts, it goes into survival mode, fight, flight, or freeze. And it happens to all of us because we're mammals. So, I fretted about this until I heard a really encouraging story from a kindergarten teacher. This was a rather large group of early childhood educators, and this one kindergarten teacher, at this stage in the presentation, she said, "You know, I've been a kindergarten teacher for 30 years," and she said, "I ignore all the people who tell me not to touch the kids. They want to fire me, they can fire me." She said, "These kids need to be touched." She said, "The thing I worry about is every year there are more and more kids who want more and more touch. I want to know what's happening in their lives." She said, "These kids hang on me." And she said, "I hug them, I pull them into my lap. They learn to read sitting in my lap." And she sort of went on like this for a while. And then she said, "But you know what worried me was the kids always wanted to kiss me." She said, "I refused to kiss them because they're so germy." She said, "But one night I awakened and I had this flash of insight that there was a way the kids could kiss me and I could kiss them and they could kiss each other and we wouldn't pass our germs along." Right? She showed it to us. It's so cute. Go like this. Can you just see that those are little lips? Right? Yeah, go ahead, just kiss your neighbors now. Go ahead. Yeah, my kid. Can you feel the serotonin surging? She said it didn't take the kids long to catch on to this idea of blowing kisses, you know, across the room. She said that was so satisfying to the kids. And you know, right now we touch each other a little bit and we laugh. Serotonin. Laughter produces more serotonin in the brain. The second leg of the three-legged milking stool that supports healthy brain development in mammals is feedback. Feedback. The brain cannot develop in the absence of feedback. It's one of the reasons why children can really lag in language development. The Children's Television Network, which brought us early Sesame Street in the U.S., and they were hounded by some developmentalists for years because they said that their claims that children could learn language through television was highly overplayed. It was exaggerated. They conceded that children could learn new words, but you can't learn the full range of what language requires by interacting with a television screen. So what happened was that the Children's Television Network took to heart the criticism, and they did some interesting things. For one thing, they slowed down the number of images per second. They slowed it way down. Did any of you watch Mr. Rogers? You know that sort of approach? With his very modulated, friendly tone of voice, and the slow panning as he walked across the room. And the kids would just be talking up a storm with Mr. Rogers, right? Well, all that was in response to some of the criticisms by people who knew what was required for language, and that's rich feedback. Now, these folks said that feedback in the mammalian kingdom is hallmarked by vocal-visual communication, vocal-visual. And we now know from a whole other field of developmental inquiry, and that is the branch of psychology which has to do with working with adults who've been abused as children, who, many but not all, of course, are lacking in a whole range of social emotional skills as adults, which cause all kinds of problems. And the recognition has come about that gaze is a way that mammals respond in a way that allows the hindbrain to organize itself properly. A loving gaze, for example. We know in infancy, when the mothering person and the baby make eye contact, all kinds of positive changes are happening in both of them as a result of the gaze. For one thing, it organizes the baby's visual field. Gazing into the eyes of another person helps the baby focus, because instinctively a baby focuses on a human face. That's the thing that our gene code requires, is the presence of a human face. And as it turns out, it's actually been measured, it's about 14 inches away, which is how many centimeters? About 35? 35, yeah. Which is pretty close to the distance that a nursing baby is held. So when a baby's being nursed, there's that perfect distance for eye gaze, and all these great things are happening. Now, vocally, all mammals vocalize. And those vocalizations signal safety. So our tone of voice, our modulated voice, all the things that we use our voice with children, and our loving gaze, all of that in education, especially early education, is having a healing effect on the children's nervous system. It's quite profound. Yeah.
I just want to share something, because this just happened with a student that many of us know, little Felix, in grade 1. And I did this totally intuitively. I was walking in the hallway, he was in the middle changing his shoes, and I stopped and we started to gaze. I'd never done this with a child like this. It's 2 days ago. And I was about 14 inches from him, and we were smiling at each other, and we weren't saying anything, and all the kids around us were like, "What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?" And I could feel something in him change and calm down as we did that. It was very powerful. And so I just want to say thank you, and also honor that, like, yeah, it works.
Well, Catherine, you're bringing up such an important point, and that is the smallest gestures that we do without even thinking about it, because we love children and we love what we teach, and we have so much love in our hearts for what we do. We have to understand that the smallest gestures, even a smile, can completely change a child. For that hour, for that day, you know, it's such profound stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, please. Yeah.
You know, I moved to remember my head of school in Sonoma County, Sandy Passalacqua, named her, had a requirement of us. And of course, people, a requirement from the head of school. And she had done enormous amounts of brain search before she created this school. And we were required, but it didn't take us long to realize the value of it, to greet our children at the door every day. We'd stand at the door, all the way up through 8th grade, you know, 8th grade school, and shake their hand.
Yeah.
And gaze at them.
Yeah.
And there was a take the hand, say good morning by their name, and look them in the eye when you said their name, which of course the whole process would take 5 or 6, 10 seconds. And that was how everyone started their day. So in this big, huge wagon wheel of a setting of a school, we had outdoor entries. You would see this, the line of everyone greeting their teacher and having the touch and the gaze, and it was moving.
Yeah.
And she was right.
Yeah. It also settles us as adults, because we have so much on our mind, and we know that the day is going to be so demanding in so many ways. And when we take that moment in time, you know, it really centers us in our heart, and we have that heart matrix interaction with the children close by. They're in our subtle field. You know, they enter into that as well, and we enter into theirs. So it's important to keep that in mind. And then we have this amazing science that came out of Italy about mirroring neurons. Have you been reading about that? These areas of the mammal brain that have dedicated mirroring neurons, part of the modeling process. Yeah. And when we are in the presence of a model indicating something new, or the child is in the presence of the model, these specialized neurons turn on in various areas of the brain. They keep finding in different parts of the mammal brain. And the higher up on the evolutionary scale, the more mirroring neurons we have. Well, if I smile at a child who's in distress, even if they're angry, and the kind of kids I had for a long time that I was teaching, you know, these angry, rebellious kids, you know, nevertheless, if I can compose myself enough to have a loving heart for these brats, you know, and smile, it turns on those neurons. You know. We now know, of course. And some of them, I wanted to throttle them. They were terrible kids in a way, but, you know, they were just doing their thing. The third, which I love, is play.
Yes.
That all mammals play. In the absence of play, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. And we know that from animal studies. Animals, high mammals, monkeys who were isolated and not allowed to play, became completely dysfunctional. Children who lack play are going to have major problems throughout life. Not all of them, of course, but enough research has been done on children. We know, for example, in the US, one of the most common variables of men in prison for violent crimes are frequent head injuries, while children and lack of play. They just didn't play. Well, play is how children work. That's why play is called the work of children. They work through social emotional difficulties. It stimulates imagination, problem solving. All the things that we expect for children to do successfully as adults are encoded into the play of children. Give and take, sharing, organization, cooperation, roles, rules, the thing that Piaget really focused on, how rules get negotiated in the creation of a little society of children and so forth. McLean weighed in on this and said, from the standpoint of human evolution, no behavior development could have been more fundamental than the brain's potential for play. That's a pretty amazing statement. And we are a very playful species. But we've done some weird things to play with the best of intentions. You know, we went from open-ended play, the kind of things that many of us got to do as kids. It was rare for an adult to interfere with play when I was a kid. Rare, it was a rarity. We would avoid adults at all costs. And now play usually involves adults organizing everything. Well, what happens when adults organize everything? Well, children don't get to do what Piaget said they have to do during childhood, which is negotiate rules and negotiate roles. And you see children doing that all the time. They start a club. They make up the rules. They argue over the rules for days. They argue over the roles, right? For days. And then when they get everything sorted out, they say, this is boring. Let's make a new one. You know, what are they doing? They're actually producing society. Piaget pointed that out, right? So now you get a bunch of well-meaning adults in there who are setting up play stations for kids and mastery tasks. This is the big thing happening in the US. Is preschool children have certain mastery tasks that they have to get through. Well, what happened to play? That's how children master their environment. I don't know. It's all well intended, but I don't know where it's going to go next. We're going to eliminate play altogether, children? Well, we're doing that in the US in a lot of cases.
Recess.
Yeah, recess is now gone in 60% of American schools after 4th grade. No, they don't do recess anymore.
My 6th graders last year had 20 minutes to eat at recess.
Yep, no recess.
And so many behavior problems you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
20 minutes, go eat, go play, and the bell was going to ring.
Yep.
And that's what I got too. And the behavior problems were unbelievable. 6th grade.
You were bad too.
That was terrible.
That's really
It's not only child abuse, it's teacher abuse. No, it is.
You're right.
It is.
That was very
There's something so wrong. It just makes me crazy to think about it. I'm like, what are we going to do? When are we going to wake up?
What is so important that they have to learn?
I never would have made it through school as a kid without frequent recess and large windows I could stare out all day. What, did you just call on me? What? I was a daydreamer, a drifter. I got through high school with a D average. I was so unmotivated to learn what I was supposed to learn. But somehow I survived it. Now, I'm not going to read this to you. Number one, it'll be in your handouts. But I'm just to say this. We know a lot about play. There's a huge scientific field that studies play. You know, and it's not like we have to even have all that to know that children have to play. so I want to go in a different direction with this to point out one of the things that happens in schools without us knowing it. I think we need to know it, and that is this thing of state regulation. The children, by a certain age, need to be able to regulate their own states. They need to regulate their brain states, their moods, the energy levels, their brains, and so forth. They need to have the ability to self-control so that others don't have to be in control of that. And that has to do with the upper part of the vagal system. And I mentioned that earlier. The vagal system, vagus means traveler. It's the largest trunk that the nervous system travels on in the human body. And there's a bunch of really interesting research that's going on about how the low vagal can sabotage the high vagal in children who are way too stressed out, abused, neglected, threatened children whose vagal system fails to do the job it's designed to do, which has to do with the high brain being able to take hold of control and do the regulation. Now, the fact that the vagal system controls breathing medically and scientifically means that you can intervene on the vagal system by teaching children how to breathe diaphragmatically. When that becomes part of their daily routine to learn to breathe properly, what happens is the upper vagal system begins to develop in the way that it was designed to develop, all starting with the in-arms period, where the baby receives the calming, loving energy of the mothering person consistently over time. That's what helps the brain develop properly. So, let me show you what diaphragmatic breathing is. Maybe some of you know it, maybe all of you know it, I don't know, but we'll just do it for a moment. So, put one hand basically below your navel, and your other hand about mid-chest. And the feeling of diaphragmatic, well, I should say this. The diaphragm is like a parachute, like a bellows, and it goes from the front of the rib cage to the back, right? Now, it sits like this. When we're stressed or afraid or nervous or in fight or flight, it's the upper third of the lungs which is doing the breathing. And the pace of our breathing can be upwards of 25, 30 breaths a minute without our even knowing it. What that's doing is it's changing the pH of the blood because we're getting way too much CO2 down low in the lungs, not enough oxygen. And it's turning the blood acid, which we now know when we're too acidic, it's what undergirds a lot of our health problems, right? So there's a lot to this. Now, when we diaphragmatically breathe, the breathing begins low down so that it pulls the bellows downwards. So the very first felt gesture of diaphragmatic breathing is here. So when we take a breath in, the first movement is the midsection drops a bit into our hand. So let's try it. And then the last part we feel is the chest. So just play with that for a minute or so. So you want to pay particular attention to that very subtle first gesture, followed by this one, right? Now, the science of breathology, if you will, is, and I'll mention this again later today, when it comes to the two arms, there's three arms, one's the enteric nervous system, but absent that, The two arms of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic, which is the gas pedal, and the parasympathetic, which is the brake. And the ideal day of living is that ultradian rhythm where we're drawing down on the sympathetic energy to stay focused and attend and do good things. And then we need this recovery time, that's the parasympathetic. It's restoring all the brain chemicals that are going to help us stay focused here. So we need those downtimes. It's restorative, right? So when we breathe in a certain cycle, it balances immediately the nervous system. That cycle is 6 per minute. I'll show you the graphic later on. So we'll come back to this later this afternoon. And when we teach, I had some of the children do that. When we condition our body to go into a 6-cycle breathing cycle per minute, the body responds by going into autonomic system balance very rapidly. So when we take a period of time in our lives to practice these things and get the body memory going for it, we can, whenever we want, go very quickly into it. We close our eyes, we do a 6 count per minute, counting 5 in, counting 5 out, and even more sophisticated is a longer out breath, because the long out breath is the parasympathetic nervous system. The in breath is the sympathetic. Am I getting too technical? No? Okay, good. So, even better is to breathe in 4, but out breath 6. And then we're breathing all that CO2 out, right? So it's 4 in, but 6 out. So now we're doing a really good gas exchange, right? We're getting more oxygen down into the lungs. The blood's turning more alkaline. We're going to experience less inflammatory response, which is a major undergirding element in many of the chronic diseases. We're overly inflamed, and stress will do that. Yeah?
So it was interesting yesterday when you did that with the students, because first you had them just count how many breaths they had.
Yeah.
And then...
and ask them how many, right?
And some of them had, like 30, which is, as you said later, that's high stress state.
Yeah.
And then we did this other exercise. It was quite interesting to see where kids were without even necessarily seeing them in that state.
Yeah. And my hope is the teachers who were able to be present will just run with that. Just start doing that with the kids. These things don't have to take very long. You need a period of practice where you have to devote a little bit more time to it. But after a while, then you can just be, okay, we're going to close our eyes and we're going to do a minute of diaphragmatic breathing, and really the kids will ask for it. Can we do that breathing thing again? So you do it after a period of intense whatever. Energy's high and all that, and you want to settle it down. Well, kids get used to it. Okay, now we're going to have a calming minute, quiet minute. All right. Now, this is another little secret too, that the tone of our voice, the pace of our voice, can have a very calming effect on other people, especially children. So, we learn it. We learn how to modulate our voice. Teachers will learn a lot of these things on their own without the benefit of the science. But gee, when you know the science. All right, now there's some other things that can be done as well, and that are present. I can see them in the classrooms. I can sense it in the environment, but there's a whole drop-down menu of things environmentally, which also strengthen the upper vagal pathway, right? When the surroundings have beauty, when there are beautiful objects, colors, surroundings, it's calming for us. Dancing and moving, rhythm, music. There's so many things that we can put into a day that puts children in a state of being that allows them to learn, sometimes at prodigious rates, if we just remember how important it is to access that high brain, that avenue, that road into the high brain, which is largely controlled by the vagal system. So many of these things, and with young children, of course, and Sue would know this probably better than anybody, the pacing and the transitions that happen. You know, in a given day, as teachers, there's dozens and dozens of transitions that happen. And, you know, if we're not attentive to the fact that children's sense of timing and pace and transition is different, it could evolve. And then for the kids who are really a challenge, who go sort of nuts during transitional stages, setting aside maybe a safe place for them to go to while everybody else transitions. And some schools have actually brought in like barrels, padded barrels, and the kids crawl into them during a transition, right? So they just kind of space out a little bit and all the distracting stuff going on. And then once everybody's settled, they crawl out and...
Yeah, it's physical.
Yeah.
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 It's hard in my school. The kids they have a 10-minute change. They want to come right in and know what they're doing. Or try to play on their computer or their phone for a minute. It's hard to get them to take a break. I don't want to talk about what we're doing. This is our break time. Let's talk about how your dog's doing. Or, you know, but it's difficult because we do then have people in the hall going,
Yeah, it helps.
but
It helps if everybody's on the same page, more or less. When you want to do these things that you know are good for kids, but it's going to take a little bit of time maybe out of the, you know, the academic pressures that we're under. Yeah.
my husband's better at this than I am, but aromatherapy.
Oh,
He'll bring in coffee beans or like lavender.
Lavender's
He
very
teaches
good.
IB history, so he has a lot of stress, very high stress.
Yeah.
High school kids.
Oh, yeah.
And they love the aromatherapy. It's
It's marvelous, yeah. A lot of these things really need to be thought about systematically and early so that by the time children get into that upper IB, they're so stressed out, which is why I talk to teenagers, I talk a lot about the benefits of quiet time as part of the learning cycle and sleep. So I made sure that I hit sleep with all the kids.
good.
Yeah, it's so important. A lot of learning leaks out with improper sleep. Neurogenesis, the creation of new brain cells, slows way down. And if you got low neurogenesis, well, there goes the learning. Really, the key in early childhood is delight. The more that children have a sense of delight, the easier it is for them to learn. That's really the key. Now, what happens with this sort of environment that surrounds children is they learn to self-regulate. They learn to self-regulate. And then they're on their way for life. You know, if children can modulate their emotions, their thoughts, their social interactions, they're on their way. Now, unfortunately, this really strange thing has happened, and it sort of looks like this. Y'all heard of baby Einstein? What a disaster. There were some really angry, knowledgeable moms in the US who hounded the Disney Corporation for promoting baby Einstein as a viable substitute for nurture, feedback, and play. And to Disney's credit, they publicly issued an apology and a refund to any parent who had purchased baby Einstein.
That really exists.
Sorry?
That exists.
Yes, oh yes. This is called Baby Einstein. And it was pushed hard by the Disney Corporation. And I remember when it came out, and people in my presentations would come up and sort of look around the room and say, what do you think of Baby Einstein? And I knew they were doing it with their babies. I'd say, you know what? I don't think you should be doing that. Yeah. But there's also this, right?
Yeah.
That children are really spending a lot more time than I believe they ought to be. In my view, there's no reason why children should have any screen time until around age 6. But at the same time, I'm really aware that with the lifestyles we've gotten used to, that parents oftentimes need babysitters. But it's so ubiquitous and it's been pushed so hard by tech companies. For the past 15 years, there's about $40 billion in advertising budgets that have been used to sell all of us on the idea that we have to get these things in the hands of children. Despite the knowledge going along with it that this stuff is way too powerful, it takes all those senses and narrows them down to 2, visual and audio, at a time when it's critical for children to have rich social, cultural, and natural world experiences. This is a fabulous theory that's really captivated the psychology world, really the clinical world. State regulation is disrupted by early childhood exposure to technology. State regulation is learned through social interaction components of education, although changes in education are moving away from face-to-face interaction. Society, including our education system, is emphasizing interaction with objects and not with people. If schools continue on this trajectory of, quote, technological advancement, children will not get the neural exercise to support social behavior and state regulation. So it really is pretty much in line with what we know about how the brain organizes itself. Bottom to top. So I'm gonna switch topics here. I'm actually gonna do something that was reserved for this afternoon. It was going under the title of Strategies for Engaged Learning. But before I do that, again, I want to just give you an opportunity to talk among your colleagues a bit about how you're viewing these things. Maybe thinking about, is there anything here that you want to do more of individually and maybe as a school as a result of some of this information? Anything less of? You know, in other words, how would you begin to think about applying some of this, which may not be particularly new to you, but maybe you're just thinking about it again. So in any case, however it unfolds, I'm going to just give you some time to talk, and then we're going to do movement. We're going to get into movement. So, on movement, which is something we should be doing all of our lives. You know, when I was sharing this with the kids, I didn't include the slides for today. But this is the area right here in the mammal brain where we get most of our new brain cells every day. It's interesting. We get lots of new brain cells every day. Yeah.
I'm glad you're touching on that, because when you had said that we are losing 1% of our gray matter, we're still gaining brain cells. So there's still, it's like a regeneration. I mean, I guess it's part of that. Every 7 years, your entire body's a different set of cells. So it's kind of like two things are happening at the same time. The diminishment and the growth.
And that's nature's plan, and why the brain is referred to as plastic. Yeah, I mean, that's a big word in brain science, is the brain is plastic, meaning it's malleable, it changes all the time. Every time we learn something, the brain has to change shape. And now we know, after nearly a century of some unfortunate scientific dogma which says, no, you can't get new brain cells. The argument's over. We get new brain cells. And what I was showing the kids was some of the early mammal studies which were showing, well, this one shows it too, that many of the new brain cells, and that's what this is, show up in the sensory motor area, but where they express themselves is in the cognitive, in the mental domain, right? So the more sensory stimulation that we get, the more cognitive power we get, which is why they say that if you want to keep the brain vital and learning, learn a foreign language, travel, learn. And that's an exercise. Cardiovascular exercise really generates a lot of neurons. So that brings us to the topic as well of movement for life. So movement, generally speaking, has two major functions. One function is that it organizes all areas of children's brains, unlike any other activity. So if we want children's brains to be well integrated, we want them to be moving. And the more graceful, coordinated movements, emphasizing proper posture and so on, the better. The second major function of movement throughout life is that movement energizes the brain. It activates the frontal lobes of the brain. Very importantly. So let's get up and move a little bit. All right, so we're going to do a 6 count. Anything with rhythm is helpful. Looks like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, okay, a change is coming. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 6. Takes a certain amount of concentration, doesn't it? One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 5, Now, could you imagine learning this if I just explained it to you without modeling it? There's no way we could do that. After a while, the brain has already adapted. It's created new proteins. It's made new connections. That's how fast the brain can learn these things. All right, now, here's the test, right? You're going to do it with a partner. You'll figure it out.
I'm going over here. I'm going to try over here.